So there was a point in American history when the Congress considered banning war profiteering.
Yes.
When did that happen? And
1934.
1934.
Gerald Nye.
Yeah, it was a great committee.
The Nye committee hearings in the Senate were an extraordinary moment, and it was a reaction to World War I. Because while what Wilson said, we want 1 million volunteers. Well, they got 73,000. Because Americans had been watching the World War I in Europe go on for 3 years. They saw the trench warfare. They saw the poison gas. It was a horrible war. And so very few Americans wanted to volunteer. So we had a draft instead. But afterwards, in the 1920s, going back to Hollywood, they had a lot of fabulous movies about World War I that were passionately anti-war. Movies like The Big Parade, Wings, All Quiet on the Western Front. And the novels, almost all the Americans' writers were opposed to the war. And so the American attitude was very negative about World War I. So in 1934, Gerald Nye proposes these hearings and a new legislation to eliminate all profit from war. Now these bastards are making enormous amounts of profit.
So that's such an obvious idea that your national industries shouldn't get rich from war.
Yeah,
because it sets up an incentive for those same industries to lobby for war, which is what we do now. It's a self-evidently good idea, it seems to me. What happened to it?
Well, then they started to go after Wilson because it was a bipartisan effort on the committee. It had front-page headlines.
Who was Gerald Nye?
Gerald Nye was a senator from
Midwest.
Yeah, Midwest Republican.
Yeah.
Progressive. There were a lot of progressive anti-war Republicans during World War I and then afterwards in the 20s and 30s.
They've been libeled ever since.
Is one of the greats, but there were a lot of them then. And they weren't strictly isolation. William Borah was one of the leaders from Idaho.
Henry Wallace was from Iowa.
Right, Henry Wallace from Iowa. And so, but when they started to go after Truman, the Democrats got very defensive. I mean, after Wilson, the Democrats got very defensive, and they blew up the hearings. Even Roosevelt was supportive of what they were calling for in 1934.
So what were they calling for?
Well, there were various variants on this. One was to either tax everything above $10,000 once war began. Anything that people earned over $10,000 would be taxed at either 98% or 100%, because the DuPonts and the Morgans Mellons made huge profits out of World War I, astronomical profits. And, part of the reason why we got involved in the war at all, even though American people did not want to, was because Morgan Banks had lent $2.5 billion to the Allies and $100 million to the other side. And so it was clear which side we were going to get involved in. What Wilson said when he was criticized, because he ran in 1916 as a peace candidate, the slogan was, "We kept America out of the war." And then in 1917, they changed the slogan to, "It's the war to end all wars," or "the war to make the world safe for democracy." But Wilson entered it in large part because he knew that if we didn't, then the U.S. would have no hand in the post-war settlement. And he said, we have to be in it so that we can shape the post-war world. And he came up with the League of Nations, which could have been a good idea under certain circumstances. But his 14 points were very progressive. But the British and French colonialists were not going to accept it. And as Oliver said before, when the Soviet Revolution occurred, one of the first things they did is they broke in and found all the diplomatic papers which showed the secret treaties between Russia, France, and Britain to divide up the Middle East. The problems we're talking about now trace back to then, to the colonialists who controlled the Middle East. But this was going on all over the world. They had this plan. The Germans wanted to get involved in the war in part because they were latecomers to the empire in Africa. They felt they'd been frozen out of the empires that the British and French and Dutch and Portuguese all were controlling.
Yeah, Wilson wouldn't meet with Ho Chi Minh from Vietnam.
Yes.
Famous story, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you can't trust the things you hear or read, like every news source is hollow, distorted, or clearly just propaganda lying to you? Well, you're not imagining it. If the last few years have proven anything, it's that Legacy media exists to distort the truth and to control you, to gatekeep information from the public instead of letting you know what's actually going on. They don't want you to know. But there is, however, a publication that fights this, that is not propaganda, one that we read every month and have for many years. It's called Primus. It's from Hillsdale College in Michigan. And Primus is a free speech digest that features some of the best minds in the country addressing the questions that actually matter, the ones that are not addressed in the Washington Post or on NBC News. The best part of it, it is free, no cost whatsoever, no strings attached. They just send it to you. Hillsdale will send Primus right to your house, no charge. All you got to do is ask. Go to tuckerforhillsdale.com and subscribe for free today. That's tuckerforhillsdale.com. The only way this stays a democracy is if the citizenry is informed. You can't fight tyranny if you don't know what's going on. Primus helps. It's free. Don't wait. Sign up now.
There's an interesting play by Arthur Miller. His first play, All My Sons. You ever see it?
No.
Yeah.
Oh, they made it. It was a big hit before Salesman, and it was made into a movie. But it's about war profiteering. There are two sons, and the older son goes against the father when he finds out that the father has been making defective parts, and his brother is killed in one of the planes that crashes because they're defective, which happens a lot more now than ever because we have such a corrupt system. They have crashes of this new F-35.
Yes.
It's the biggest boondoggle of all time. So it seems like this, and that play had a huge impact. It was Broadway, 1945-6. That's part of the reality of war is that people make money with it. And that people knew that then at that level. And it goes on and on.
But they weren't able.
It's gotten worse. The profiteering. Gerald Nye should come out of the fucking woodwork now and investigate.
Another play that Oliver knows that also is critical of war profiteering was Waiting for Lefty by Clifford Odets. They've also got various episodes about condemning the war profiteering.
But they failed to get control of the system in 1934, and no one's tried since.
They came close, and it was overwhelmingly popular at the time. And then the Democrats reacted to this allegations against Wilson getting us into the war to help.
What's interesting, though, is that history now regards anybody who had second thoughts about the First World War and anyone who didn't want to get into another war in Europe in the 30s as pro-Nazi. That is how they're isolationist, they're pro-Hitler. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
The kids don't even know about World War I.
Right.
That's really ancient history. They hardly know about hardly know about Vietnam.
Yeah.
Oliver fought in Vietnam. Oliver volunteered for combat in Vietnam. Probably the only person to drop out of Yale and volunteer for combat in Vietnam in history.
No.
No?
I think there are others.
Oh, maybe. I doubt it. But, and I was an anti-war activist during that period. But I was in Hanoi in January. And it's interesting to me because I had Robert McNamara come into my class some years ago. And McNamara said to my students that he accepts that 3.8 million Vietnamese died in the war. And I've always used that figure because it's mind-boggling. But when I was in Hanoi, the Vietnamese leaders told me that now the figure that they use is 5 million Vietnamese. So the one place that all my students have been is the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., which you've been there. And it's got two walls with 492 feet long with the names of 58,280 Americans who died. And the message is the tragedy of Vietnam is that 58,280 Americans died, which is part of it. But if you included the 5 million Vietnamese, the million Cambodians and Laotians, the Americans, the Brits, the Aussies, the Thais, everybody who died, that wall would be more than 10 miles long. And that would be a fitting tribute to the Vietnam, but it would send a whole different message. Oliver and I are invited to Okinawa in February by the prefectural government to support the anti-base movement in Okinawa. Another story we could get into. But the Okinawa War Memorial has the names of all the Okinawans, the Japanese, the Americans, the Brits, the Aussies, everybody who died there. And that would be an anti-war memorial. But what the Vietnam Memorial, sadly, as powerful as it is giving the wrong message. And America is always giving the wrong message when it comes to war.
So is it strange for you, we touched at the outset at, and as Oliver put it, the complete inversion of American politics, but you said an anti-war protester during Vietnam, then you watched the party you voted for become the war party. Like what happened? What caused that inversion?
Well, the United States foreign policy has been bipartisan
Yes.
throughout the Cold War, really. And so both parties have been war parties.
Correct.
But there was a strong element within the Democratic Party, the progressive Democrats, who were much more anti-war, anti-defense spending, and wanted to use that money instead for health care and education and infrastructure and the things that people need that actually help people's lives. But it's become this groupthink now. And even progressive Democrats who are my friends sound so hawkish these days that I don't recognize them. And the odd thing, so we had this reversal. Trump ran as the anti-war candidate.
Yes.
Trump ran as the pro-labor candidate. You know, it makes no sense to those of us who grew up. I was never a Democrat, but I usually voted for the Democrats because they were more progressive than the Republicans. But at this point, you've got two war parties, although there's a stronger faction in the Republican Party at this moment who are at least making sense about the nuclear threat and about Ukraine.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.